Hi, I'm Shannon Aldridge Whaley, and this is the real estate class. Today, we're here to talk about land characteristics. I hope that you like this offering and you subscribe to our channel. But some of the key words we need to go over today are just what is land? Fructus naturalis versus Fructus industrialis, the alluvial and feudal systems, physical and economic characteristics of land, the foundation and the building blocks for our legal descriptions. And if we start with the concept of the land itself, the land itself goes to the center of the earth and to infinity and beyond. And it includes all the grasses and shrubberies and trees and bushes and ponds that are attached to the surface of the land. But it also includes all of our subsurface, water, and air rights. Now, if you think about the land itself, we want to consider what are Fructus naturalis versus Fructus industrialis. If you talk about Fructus naturalis, it's what naturally comes with the property. It's considered real property because it's perennial. It comes back year after year after year. The fruit trees in the orchard, the grapevines in the field, the grasses, the shrubberies, the tulips, and the daffodils. They're all considered real property. By the way, they're annexed to the surface of the land. But what about annuals? Annuals are considered implements that you laid, you sowed onto the surface of the land to harvest at a later date. Fructus industrialis, the fruits of my industry or the fruits of my labor. These crops are considered personal property. And there are times when the former tenant or the former owner of a property may have the right to come back to harvest the fruits of their industry. So let's think about the corn. The tenant farmer plants a field of corn. So they plant in May or June, and somehow the owner of the farm terminates their lease, and they're forced to leave, not of their own choice. In that case, that tenant farmer would have the right to come back and retrieve the fruits of their labor to get the corn when it's time to harvest. Now, on the flip side of that, if the tenant farmer had planted the corn and then voluntarily left, the corn, of course, through its cession becomes property of the landowner themselves. Here in the United States, we practice the alluvial system. This allows for the ownership of land. It allows for the American dream. The feudal system, which is very old school, the landlords, the lords of the manor owned all the land, and they would lease it out to tenant farmers, those fiefdoms where people would be able to plant their crops, but they were still paying a rent. So land has both physical and economic characteristics. And of course, the first thing to consider is it's immobile. The location is never going to change. It's fixed. It's an important factor in determining the value of the land because location. And the land itself is influenced by the properties around it, the abutters, how those properties are handled, or they need changes in the area. And land is what we base it all on because it's easily taxed. It's easy to be regulated by the government with building codes and fire safety codes. And we want to have an exact description of the land when we're transferring it to someone else. So the first thing to consider about land is it's immobile. The next thing to consider, it's also indestructible. Because to destroy the land, I would have to go all the way to the center of the earth. Now, land can, of course, be poisoned and damaged and altered, but it can't be destroyed. And that's why we start considering insurance policies. We're insuring the building and not the land. The buildings typically have a long life, but the land is forever. We can alter it, but we can't wear it out. We can remove items from the subsurface, but we still have the land. So it's considered indestructible. And then our final physical characteristic about land is the fact every location is unique. They're like a snowflake. And the language that you can use instead of unique is a lot of fun, like non-homogeneity, non-homogeneous, not the same. Thing about homogeneous milk. Homogeneous means it's all the same. Non-homogeneity says we're unique, that no two locations are ever the same. They're always going to be in a different geographical location. And because land is not duplicatable, one location for another, not substitutable, we can also use the language of non-fungible. Ooh, I like that one. So non-homogeneity, meaning two lots are never the same, and non-fungible, saying we can't substitute one for the other because each location is as different as a snowflake. And location is often what drives the buyer. They want to make sure they're in the right spot. Now, land has economic characteristics too. Land itself is limited. Dry land is finite. We have a lot of oceans. There's really no shortage of land supply. It's just some locations are better than others. They have a higher quality. Location is really everything at the end of the day. But land differs depending on location. And if the location is incredibly popular, there might not be enough land to meet demand. When you're thinking about location, a strong demand for a particular location is going to drive up the property values, drive up the prices. But there's also a good reason to leave certain tracts of land undeveloped to preserve species, to preserve nature. And when you think in terms of economics, another great word to consider is inelastic. It means a commodity that has a fixed supply, like only so many downtown condos or only so many farmsteads. Land. Well, what we put on the land, that's going to change the economics too. These human-made modifications. The land by itself just comes with fructus naturalis. But when we start to add these improvements, we start to consider real estate. And it could be a tar paper shack or it could be a mansion. It's still considered an improvement. And improvements can be on the lot, those on-site improvements like the house and the garage and the in-ground pool. Or outside the boundaries of the lot for the road and the utilities and the sidewalks. The improvements on the land itself does affect the economic value. So consider your neighbors. If you look at these two scenarios, which location is really more favorable to improve residential property values? Would it increase the value of a property to be next door to a 24-hour gas station, or would it be better to be walking distance to a park? Location. And then the house itself and how it looks on the street also makes a difference. If you consider these two houses, the landscaping can increase the value of the property simply by giving it better curb appeal. Investments, the permanence of investments. Putting all that infrastructure into the land when we're talking about septic systems and utilities and improvements costs a lot of money and is a long-term investment. So we think of it in terms of fixity. Once you put improvements into long raw land, you're going to have a longer-term investment. Transactions become less frequent. They're complex, and it takes time to consummate because now we have improvements built onto the land itself. So things to consider when you're purchasing. Land cannot be moved when the market changes. It's both immobile and indestructible. I can destroy the building, burn it down to the ground, but the land is forever. The long-term improvements we put into the property really do talk to its fixity. Drainage, water, sewer, utilities, it's hard to take them out. It's a lot easier to put them in. Location, location, location. But always consider that we can use other language for location, area preference, or situs. See the word site? Place. Where would someone prefer to live? And people do have preferences, what's going to work for them. And since the location can never be changed, it's fixed. It's always in the same geographic location, which makes it the most important characteristic of all. Because at the end of the day, location is always going to determine the final value of a property. You know, how easy is it to walk downtown or to commute to work? What are the locations nearby for dining or church or leisure activities? The reputation of an area or even the reputation of a builder can change the value of a property, but they want to make sure they're in the right location. And each and every location is unique. So I hope you've enjoyed this little bit on land characteristics, but I want to leave you with one of my really bad jokes and probably one of my favorites. Did you hear about Robin Hood's house? Well, it has a little John. I hear the groans. So wrapping up land characteristics, let's remember that land goes to the center of the earth and to infinity and beyond, and includes all fructus naturalis, surface, subsurface, water, and air rights. Always take into consideration the physical and economic characteristics of land, because it does speak to value. I thank you for joining me today for this topic of land characteristics. If you enjoyed us, please subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you next time.